I found out my wife's promotion was bought with a currency I never agreed to spend. Not money, not talent, not sacrifice in the way people usually mean it. She paid for her career with our marriage. And she never even asked me if that was a fair trade. If you looked at us from the outside, you'd say we were doing fine. Not rich, not glamorous. Just a normal couple in a small house with a creaky porch, a shared grocery list, and a worn-out couch that still smelled faintly like the cheap pizza we'd eaten way too many nights in a row. We had our routine, our little rituals, our inside jokes. We weren't perfect, but we were stable, and stable felt safe. She worked in a mid-sized company in some corporate role that always sounded more impressive on paper than in real life. Project coordination, internal communications, process management, titles that looked good on a LinkedIn profile and meant a lot of late nights with documents nobody actually wanted to read. I worked a pretty straightforward job, nothing flashy, nothing that would impress anyone at a fancy dinner, but it paid the bills and let me sleep at night without worrying too much. She was always more ambitious than me. That was one of the things I loved about her. Where I saw enough, she saw not yet. Where I saw a decent life, she saw a launching pad. She wanted more responsibility, more recognition, more money, more something. I respected that. I really did. Until the day I realized more had quietly turned into instead of. Looking back, the story didn't start with her. It started with him. Her company got a new department head, some hotshot from another city with a reputation for getting results. His name landed in our conversations before he landed in our lives. At first, it was just small mentions. He was sharp. He was demanding. He noticed her work. She said he was the kind of guy who could change careers. That phrase stuck with me. At the time, I thought she meant in a good way. He scheduled extra meetings, late ones. He sent long emails with suggestions. He liked staying after hours to go over strategy. She talked about him a lot, more than she realized, more than I liked, not in an obvious, dreamy way. Nothing you could point at and say, that's wrong. It was subtler than that, the kind of quiet admiration that slips in under the radar. I noticed the change before I understood it. Her eyes lit up when she talked about work, which was good, until I realized it wasn't work she was excited about. It was opportunity. Opportunity with a face and a last name. Her boss. At first, the late nights were occasional. She'd text me that she had to stay an hour or two longer. Something about a new project, a client call, a last-minute deadline. It all made sense. Companies don't advance people who clock out at 5 on the dot. So I played the supportive husband. I made dinner, kept it warm. I told her to focus, to impress, to go for the promotion she'd been wanting. But then the sometimes became often. The tonight only turned into this whole week. The texts shifted from stuck at work to don't wait up. First I brushed it off. Then I started counting. 1 late night, then 3, then 5 out of 7. She came home tired. Always tired. But not the kind of tired that comes from physical work. It was the brittle, restless, wired kind of tired. The kind that sits on the edge of a secret. She started showering the second she walked through the door. Not dropping her bag. Not kissing me. Straight to the bathroom. Steam. Closed door. 15, 20 minutes. By the time she came out, the day was washed off her. Whatever it held, whatever she'd done, whatever work she'd been busy with, it all went down the drain. She'd kiss me on the head, sit on the edge of the couch, and talk about how exhausted she was. And I'd nod along like a man who trusted his wife. Because I did. I trusted her. Trust, I later learned, doesn't disappear when you're betrayed. It dies long before that. One cut at a time. The changes in her weren't big at first. They were small, easy-to-dismiss details that only make sense when you look back and line them up like puzzle pieces. She bought new clothes for work. More fitted. More expensive than usual. She started wearing perfume every day, even on days she didn't need to impress anyone. A scent she never wore around the house before. Her phone was always face down. The notifications were always on silent. There was always some group chat from work that she couldn't ignore. She smiled at her screen more. She smiled at me less. We still lived in the same house. Still slept in the same bed. Still called each other the same names. But somewhere along the way, we had stopped being partners and started being roommates with shared utility bills and different emotional addresses. She talked about a promotion more often. "They're considering me," she said once. "These things take time," she said another day. "I have to show I'm committed," she repeated like it was a mantra. Committed to what? Or to whom? I didn't ask. Not then. I didn't want to be that guy. The insecure husband who can't handle his wife's career. I told myself these sacrifices were temporary. That once she got that title, things would calm down. That we'd go back to normal. We never did. One Friday, I decided to surprise her. I got off work early, a rare thing, and figured I could pick her up from the office, bring her favorite takeout, maybe steal a couple of hours together before she got swallowed by whatever project was currently consuming her. I didn't tell her. I wanted to do something nice, something simple, something like we used to do. Her company was in one of those glass buildings where everything looks modern and nobody looks happy. I parked across the street, grabbed the food, and headed toward the entrance. That's when I saw her. Not inside. Not at her desk through a window. Outside. Standing next to him. Her boss. They were close. Not touching. Not obvious. But close. He said something. She tilted her head back and laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her at home in months. He put his hand on her arm. Just a light touch. Short. Casual enough that anyone could say it meant nothing. But body language doesn't lie. And her body language was loud. Relaxed. Open. Easy. She looked like a woman standing next to possibility. Not a woman in a hurry to get home to her husband. I froze on the sidewalk, half hidden behind a parked car, feeling ridiculous and stupid and strangely outside of my own life. I could have gone up to her. I could have said, "Hey, surprise." I could have watched her face for that split second of panic. Instead, I stood there and watched them say goodbye. He leaned in, too close for just a boss, too familiar for just colleagues. They didn't kiss. But if you've ever watched two people who know exactly what they're doing, you know a line had already been crossed long before lips got involved. She walked back inside. He got in his car and drove off. I stood with a warm paper bag in my hand and something cold growing in my chest. Then I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove home. The food went in the fridge. The suspicion stayed out. That night, when she came home late again, I tried to talk to her. Not accusing. Not confrontational. Just probing. "How's work? How's the team? Are you under a lot of pressure?" She gave me answers, but not connection. Everything was fine. Everyone was busy. He was demanding but fair. She said he pushed her. That he believed in her. That he thought she had real potential. She said it with a glow in her eyes that used to be reserved for different topics. For us. For plans we made together. I didn't mention seeing them outside. I didn't mention his hand on her arm. Instead, I asked what the promotion would actually mean. More money, sure. But more hours too. More trips. More late nights. "Just at the beginning," she said, waving it off. "It's how the game works." The game. That's the word she used. Like this was all some strategy. Like these were just moves on a board. Not hours of her life she was spending away from our marriage. The more she talked, the more I realized something unsettling. Somewhere along the way, our life together had become her backup plan. Her real life. The one that excited her, consumed her, defined her. Now lived in that office in those late nights, in the approval of a man who controlled the ladder she wanted to climb. I wasn't her partner in that game. I was home base. Safe. Steady. Unexciting. Place to reset, not a place to live. The night she told me she got the promotion, she was glowing. She burst through the door with the kind of energy I hadn't seen since before everything started changing. Her eyes were bright, her smile wide, her whole body buzzing. She said she did it. She got it. New title. Bigger paycheck. More responsibility. She danced around the kitchen with a joy that felt genuine. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being invited into a celebration for something I didn't fully understand. We opened a bottle we'd been saving for good news. We toasted. We hugged. She kissed me, really kissed me, for the first time in too long. For a moment I wanted to believe this was it, the turning point. The sacrifice had been made, the grind was over, and now we'd reap the benefits. But the celebration felt off, like I was clapping for a performance I hadn't seen all of. She talked about how proud he was, how he'd pushed for her, how the higher-ups had hesitated but he fought for her. Every sentence had his shadow behind it. Her boss had become the invisible third person in every room she emotionally walked into, and I started to wonder what exactly she had given up to get where she was. Time? Sleep? Sanity? Or something else entirely? The higher she climbed, the stranger things got. The promotion didn't bring stability. It brought more late nights, more work trips, more weekends where she was too tired to do anything but scroll her phone and sleep. Her phone, by the way, never left her side. She took it to the bathroom, to the kitchen, to bed. Face down, always on silent. If I ever reached for it by accident, she reacted like I'd grabbed a lit stove. We fought for the first time in a long time. Not shouting, not throwing things, just sharp words and quiet anger. I told her I felt like she was drifting away. She told me I was being dramatic. I told her I wanted time with her. She told me she was doing all of this for us. Funny how that word can be used to justify things that are killing exactly what it claims to protect. I let it go, or at least I tried to. But my trust had already taken a hit it wouldn't fully recover from. Suspicion is a dangerous thing. It can make you see ghosts where there are none. It can also make you finally see the ghosts that have been in the room the whole time. One evening, she went to the gym. It wasn't part of her usual routine, but she'd mentioned wanting to take better care of herself. Now that she was in a more visible position at work. Fair enough. I encouraged it. A healthy body, a sharp mind, all sounded good. But that evening, something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way she grabbed her things too quickly. Maybe it was how she avoided eye contact when she said goodbye. Maybe it was the fact that she took the perfume and the lipstick, but not the actual gym bag she usually carried. I told myself to drop it. Instead, I grabbed my keys 15 minutes after she left. I drove past the gym. Her car wasn't there. Not in the lot. Not on the street. Nowhere. I drove slowly, heart pounding, mind racing, turning over possibilities like stones. Maybe she changed her mind. Maybe she went to a different location. Maybe, then I saw it. Her car. Parked in a quiet street near the office building. Lights off. Engine cold. And nearby, parked just a little too close, like they didn't even think about optics anymore, was a car I had seen enough times in photos and from afar to know it instantly. Her bosses. I didn't go closer. Didn't march up. Didn't look through windows. I just sat there at the end of the street, engine running, staring at two cars that told a story nobody had the courage to say out loud. That was the moment the last piece clicked. Her long hours, her sudden importance, her rapid promotion, her strange energy, her brittle excuses. My wife had been building her career on something more than performance. She was sleeping with her boss. Not because she'd fallen in love. Not because they were soulmates. Because he had a ladder and she wanted the top. And the price of every rung was paid out of my life. Out of our marriage. I drove home that night without confronting her. Without calling. Without sending an angry message. Because in that moment, I understood something painful and simple. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. After the night, I saw her car parked beside her boss's. Something in me shifted in a way that didn't roar or break. It simply realigned. The world outside continued exactly as it always had. Same streets, same lights, same routine of cars and neighbors. But inside me, something had quietly snapped into a new position, like a bone that had been dislocated for too long and suddenly slid back into place. Nothing hurt. Nothing exploded. Nothing fell apart. I simply saw the truth without trying to soften it. The next morning, the house felt colder even though nothing had changed. She moved through the kitchen with the same practiced motions she always did. Pouring coffee, tying her hair, checking her phone. But everything about her felt distant, as if she had already left the moment she woke up. It was strange witnessing a person who once felt like home now moving like a visitor passing through. She avoided my eyes without making it obvious, spoke less without acknowledging the silence, and carried an invisible tension that clung to her like perfume. For the first time, I looked at her not as my wife but as someone whose life had already shifted into another orbit. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't guilty in the obvious way guilty people sometimes are. She simply seemed preoccupied, consumed by something beyond our walls, anchored to a world I wasn't invited into. And I realized then that the betrayal hadn't begun the night I saw the cars. It had begun much earlier, quietly, while I was still believing everything was fine. There is a moment in every relationship where one person starts to drift. They don't announce it. They don't break anything. They simply allow a part of themselves to detach and float toward something else. She had been drifting for months, and I had been too trusting or too blind to notice. Over the next days, that realization opened my eyes to details I used to brush aside. Her phone never left her hand. Not at dinner. Not during movies. Not even when she moved from room to room. It was always face down, always silenced, always protected like it contained the only air she could breathe. When it buzzed, her shoulders tightened. When it lit up unexpectedly, she moved instantly to block the screen with her palm. She came home exhausted every night, but it wasn't the exhaustion of hard work. It was the exhaustion of someone living a double life and trying to pour one version of themselves into the cracks of another. She disappeared into long showers, as if hot water could wash off parts of her day she didn't want to bring into our home. Her conversations with me grew thinner. They contained updates, schedules, reminders, but no heart, no warmth, no connection. She acted like she was doing her job in our marriage the way she did her job at work. Efficiently, distantly, without emotional investment. The more I watched her, the clearer it became that she had created an entirely separate life. A life centered around her boss, her ambitions, her new identity as someone rising in a company that didn't even know who she really was. It wasn't just the affair that broke us. It was the intention. She hadn't been pulled into something by accident. She had walked there willingly, step by step, choosing advancement over honesty, validation over loyalty, opportunity over marriage. The night she claimed to be at the gym was the final thread of doubt snapping. When I saw her car parked near the office instead, and his parked close beside it, something inside me stopped resisting the truth. I didn't need to see them together. I didn't need to catch anyone in the act. Two cars told the entire story without sound or movement. On the drive home, I didn't plan revenge or confrontation. I simply sat with the realization that the woman I married had become someone I couldn't recognize anymore. Someone who was willing to use my trust as cover for her ambition. Over the next week, I paid attention in a way I hadn't before. Every detail painted a picture I could no longer ignore. The late nights weren't about work. The sudden confidence wasn't about skill. The distance between us wasn't about stress. Everything pointed toward the same truth. She had traded her fidelity for her career long before I realized she was negotiating without me. Our home became a waiting room. I moved through it like someone observing the remnants of a life instead of living it. She moved through it cautiously, like she feared I'd ask questions she didn't want to answer. I watched her rehearse excuses in her head, even though I never asked anything outright. She seemed tense, irritable, easily triggered by small things, the kind of irritability that grows from the pressure of maintaining a lie. Her behavior made it painfully clear. She no longer cared about protecting our marriage. She only cared about protecting her image, her job, her next position, her next step up. I understood then what her betrayal really was. Not an emotional affair. Not a moment of weakness. It was a transaction. She had climbed a professional ladder, and instead of using skill or perseverance, she used secrecy and proximity. She had made peace with the price. She just assumed I would too. Or perhaps she assumed I'd never find out. Or worse, that I'd accept it if it secured her success. That thought pierced deeper than anything else. I realized I had become a prop in her story, the supportive husband with a calm home life. The stable background that made her look respectable. The partner who unknowingly shielded her from suspicion. She needed the appearance of a good marriage so she could operate freely outside of it. Once that truth settled into me, something inside went quiet. Not dead, not numb, just quiet. I no longer felt the urge to save anything. I no longer felt desperate to understand her choices. I no longer felt like a man who needed answers to move forward. I didn't want to fix what she broke. I didn't want to beg for attention. I didn't want to stand in the shadow of her ambition. I wanted out, not from her, from the version of myself I had become next to her. One evening she walked in, carrying that same exhausted energy, moving through the doorway like the house was an inconvenience she wished she could remove. She didn't notice the way I looked at her. Not with sadness, but with clarity. She didn't notice that something in me had already stepped away from her. She didn't notice because she no longer saw me at all. And in that moment I realized the final truth. She had ended our marriage long before I ever considered leaving. She just hadn't bothered to say it out loud. I stepped outside that night, into the cool air, and breathed with the freedom of someone who has finally stopped pretending. I wasn't running away. I was stepping out of a prison I didn't know I'd been living in. I understood that the next step would be the final one. The only one that still mattered. Leaving. Not angrily. Not dramatically. But with the dignity she never expected me to keep. I was ready to move on. Ready to detach from a woman who had already detached from me. Ready to close a chapter she had hollowed out long before I turned the last page. Redemption wasn't going to come from her. It was going to come from walking away. And I was finally ready. Leaving wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve slammed doors, raised voices, or any moment designed to echo down the hallway. It happened the way endings sometimes do in real life, quietly, with the weight of a truth that had been waiting too long to be acknowledged. I woke up one morning and realized I no longer felt married. Not in anger, not in grief, not even in disappointment. The bond was gone, dissolved slowly by months of distance and choices that were never mine. What remained wasn't a relationship, just an arrangement I no longer saw a reason to participate in. The house felt smaller than before, as if the walls had absorbed all the things we never said. Even the air felt stale. Every object looked like part of a life I was ready to walk away from. The photos we once took with genuine smiles, the furniture we picked together, the little reminders of plans that no longer matched the reality we lived in. I started by packing the essentials. Not because I was afraid of confrontation, but because staying any longer meant living next to the empty shell of a marriage she had already abandoned. My clothes, my documents, a few things that still held meaning. The process took an hour, maybe a little more. Felt less like packing and more like clearing out the last of the dust. I didn't wait for her to come home. I didn't need another round of tired explanations or attempts to soften what she'd chosen. I left a simple note, not full of accusations or bitterness, but clarity. A line was drawn and I stepped over it. I walked out the door and felt the weight fall off my shoulders instantly, like something had been loosened around my chest. It wasn't relief from leaving her. It was relief from leaving the version of myself that had stayed too long, hoping things would return to something they hadn't been in months. The world outside felt wide again. The air felt clean. Even the sky looked different. Not brighter, not kinder, just honest. Exactly the way I needed my life to be again. I spent the first nights in a temporary place, the kind of small apartment you rent when you're starting over and don't know exactly where you're heading next. The bed was too firm, the air conditioner rattled, and the place smelled faintly of paint. But it was mine. A small, imperfect beginning that didn't carry the echoes of someone else's secrets. The first morning I woke up alone. I made coffee and felt something inside me shift. There was no tension in the air. No silence that needed decoding. No anxiety waiting behind a forced smile. Just a room, a cup, and the beginning of a life that no longer depended on someone else's permission. I filed for divorce the following week. The paperwork felt clinical, almost detached. Numbers, signatures, dates, none of which captured the years behind them. But that was the point. The documents weren't about the past. They were about the boundary I finally chose to draw. She didn't fight it. Perhaps she understood it was inevitable. Perhaps she was too invested in the world she'd chosen to look back. Or perhaps admitting defeat out loud would have required more honesty than she was capable of offering. The process moved quickly. Lawyers, forms, a quiet agreement to divide what needed to be divided. Neither of us asked for anything beyond the basics. The marriage had ended long before the divorce. The signatures were just formalities. When everything was finalized, I felt no triumph, no sadness, no sense of loss. Just a clean, steady calm. A chapter closed without ripping, without tearing. Simply turned, as gently as it should have been months ago. I didn't look through old photos. I didn't linger over memories. I didn't try to understand where things went wrong. I had already understood. She had chosen a path that didn't include me, and I was choosing to walk my own without dragging the weight of her decisions behind me. I focused on rebuilding a life that felt real. Work became steady again. Days found rhythm. I bought a new set of furniture. Nothing fancy, just comfortable. I stocked my kitchen with food instead of takeout containers. Learned to enjoy quiet evenings. Found small routines that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. There were moments, of course, when echoes from the past surfaced. A smell, a familiar place, the sudden reminder of a habit she once had. But the feelings that came with those moments weren't painful. They were simply acknowledgments of a life I had lived and moved beyond. I realized something important during those quiet days. Betrayal doesn't define a man unless he clings to it. Can crush you if you hold it too tightly. But if you let it pass through you, if you allow yourself to accept what happened without letting it poison what's ahead, it becomes nothing more than a lesson. Her ambition had cost her everything that couldn't be written on a resume. My trust, our home, the version of herself she once tried to pretend she still was. But it wasn't my job to measure her losses. My only responsibility was to rebuild my own life without bitterness. And that's what I did. I found a new place. Small, modern, full of light. The kind of space that didn't feel haunted by memories or shadows. I filled it slowly with things I actually liked, not compromises we had once made. I started sleeping better, breathing easier, thinking clearer. There was no dramatic turning point, no sudden transformation, just a gradual return to myself, the version of me who existed before her ambition swallowed everything in its path. One evening, as I sat on my new balcony watching the sun dip behind the buildings, I realized something that stayed with me long after. I hadn't escaped anything. I had simply stepped back into my own life. The marriage was over. The betrayal was behind me. The future was finally mine again. Not because she let me go, but because I chose to walk toward something better. She had climbed her ladder. She had paid her price. She had made her choices. And I had made mine. No anger. No revenge. No dramatic ending. Just a quiet exit from a life that no longer belonged to me, and a calm beginning of one that finally did.